People who've had sugar daddies or sugar mommies, how did you get into it? When I was 22 in college, I met a 44-year-old woman who worked as a receptionist at the company where I was a technician. She wasn't working because she needed the money, she just needed something to do since she was tired of being at home. One day, I overheard her talking to some of the other receptionists about her dissatisfaction with her husband and their intimate life. I couldn't help myself and chimed in, suggesting she just needed to find a man who knew how to please her. I also mentioned that I'd intentionally worked on being good at that, planning to use it to keep my future wife happy when I eventually found the one. Bold, I know, but I was young, didn't care much about the repercussions, and figured this was just a temporary gig for me. She doubted my abilities because of my age, but I kept insisting I knew what I was doing. That seemed to pique her interest, and she decided to test me out to see if I could back up my words. At the time, I didn't really think about the consequences of getting involved with a married woman, especially considering her openness about it. After our first encounter, she told me I was good enough that she'd be willing to pay for it on a regular basis. I initially declined, but then she dropped a bomb. One of her close relatives was the VP at a major American car company. I, of course, suggested that I wouldn't mind being paid for the trouble, and from there, things took off. Over the next few months, we hooked up on and off. In exchange, I got some pretty nice things: a high-end watch, an expensive suit, a 50-inch flat screen, a PS4, a '99 Jeep Cherokee, which caught on fire a few weeks later unfortunately, a couple months of rent, and even a semester of tuition, which, after scholarships, was only around $1,500 but helped a lot. I also enjoyed countless bottles of whiskey and nice dinners. Most of my senior year was spent with her rather than my friends. In some ways, it was unpleasant. She could be demanding, and I missed out on some experiences. But in the end, she did me a huge favor, especially when it came to paying for my last semester. Without her support, I might not have made it through. In return, I treated her the way she deserved, which also included plenty of intimate time, to the point where I was exhausted most of the time. Eventually, she recognized the toxic dynamics in her marriage, divorced her husband, and seems much happier now. We still stay in touch occasionally, but due to distance, I never see her anymore. Looking back, it was one of the most unforgettable experiences of my life. And honestly, I wouldn't change a thing. Story 2. This happened around 5 or 6 years ago in Tokyo. I was 26 or 27 at the time and met a client who was about 32 or 33. She was incredibly attractive, smart, and well-educated, and we hit it off right away. One of her quirks was that she was a bit of a train geek, something rare for a woman in Japan, but she was passionate about it. She could tell you the make and model of every pantograph on every train in operation across the country. I had no idea who she was when we first met, but my boss later told me to treat her like a VIP at all times. It turned out she was a well-known figure in Japanese politics. After our work project wrapped up, we decided to grab a bite to eat at a nearby restaurant. She mentioned that she needed help preparing for an interview with a major company, one that was essentially creating a new role just for her. I told her I'd be happy to help. No ulterior motives, I genuinely liked her and wanted her to succeed. We met up again for a few rounds of interview prep and a final practice session. Afterward, she invited me to play darts, since she enjoyed it, and I had never played before. We went to a darts bar in the evening, and somehow, we ended up in a game where the loser had to take tequila shots. She wiped the floor with me, and we ended up doing shots well past the last train home. By the end of the night, we found ourselves at an internet cafe, and things escalated quickly. She got a little touchy-feely, and before long, we decided to leave and head to a hotel together. And that's how our relationship started. It turned out she was incredibly wealthy. She bought me all sorts of things, never let me pay for dates, even though I was making good money at the time, and wanted to take me on trips around Asia. She bought me luxury watches and clothes, which I still have and treasure. She had a Benz, an Aston Martin, and several other cars parked in her space in central Tokyo. I probably would have married her if it weren't for some complications with her marital status. After a few weeks of dating, I found out that she was in a loveless marriage and had a young child. It was a tragic situation. She was trapped in this marriage due to societal pressure and couldn't divorce. Both she and her husband were seeing other people, but because of their high profiles in the Japanese media, a divorce was unthinkable. We ended up breaking up when we both realized that having a child together would damage her political career beyond repair, and that divorcing to marry a foreigner would destroy her professionally. It was heartbreaking, but the reality of the situation couldn't be ignored. She was the best girlfriend I've ever had. If I'd met her a few years earlier, I know my life would have turned out completely differently. It wasn't about the money, it was never about that. I've never met someone I connected with so well. She truly was the one that got away. Story 3. In my early 20s, I met an older woman, probably in her mid-40s, at a bar. She was sitting alone, and as I stood nearby to order a drink, she leaned over and started complimenting me on my body. I thanked her and told her she looked great too. She handed me her business card, she was a realtor, and told me to text her at 2 a.m. I did, and she showed up at my place in a sleek, expensive Benz. By the time I woke up, she was gone. The next weekend, she texted me an address and told me to be there by 8 p.m., clearing my whole weekend for her. When I arrived, I found she had an incredible 8-bedroom house. She was wild. She taught me things I'd never experienced before and opened the door to interests I didn't even know I had. The following weekend, the same thing happened. When I showed up, she had all sorts of gifts for me, high-end clothes, shoes, and even toys to use. I'd spend time and explore all sorts of things with her. It was an absolute blast. Then, one day, she disappeared without a word. I don't regret any of it. She was incredibly kind and spoiled me rotten. She'd cook for me and bring me meals in bed, give me daily massages, and take care of me in ways I never expected. Strangely, she'd sleep in a different room most nights, but between the intimate moments, we'd have deep, meaningful conversations about anything and everything. It was a surreal experience, and I'll always remember her fondly. Story 4. When I was 19, I dated a 35-year-old woman. She wasn't super rich herself, but her dad was, and she was very much a daddy's girl. Her dad was a realtor who made his fortune through war profiteering. Essentially, when conflict started brewing in unstable regions, wealthy homeowners would sell their massive properties at significant losses, fearing the conflict would get too close. Her dad would buy these homes for cheap, and if they survived the war, he'd flip them for huge profits once the area stabilized. That was his business model. He also kept in touch with his wealthy clients, selling them vacation mansions in the US later on. These rich folks had so much money to burn it was almost absurd. To top it off, he paid my girlfriend $800 a month to check in on these clients' mansions every so often, basically, to make sure they hadn't burned down or anything. What's wild is that most of these clients lived in places like Dubai or London and hadn't visited their vacation homes in the US even once in over 20 years, despite spending a fortune to furnish and maintain them. Naturally, my girlfriend and I would occasionally take advantage of the situation. We'd spend the night in one of these mansions and just enjoy it. I've known a few wealthy people in my life, but to this day, I've never set foot in another house as enormous as that mansion. The master bathroom alone was mind-blowing. It had a separate room where the entire ceiling functioned as a shower. It was massive enough for 50 people to shower at once. I had the luxury of showering in there by myself several times, and it was honestly surreal. Story 5. A couple of years ago, during a break from college, I matched with this girl on Tinder. She seemed pretty cool, and after texting for a few days, we decided to meet up for sushi. She came to my mom's house to pick me up but parked outside for about 15 minutes, saying she was too shy to come in. Eventually, she worked up the courage and came to the door. We had sushi, came back to my place, and well, one thing led to another and we ended up in my bedroom. She stayed the night and the next morning we grabbed breakfast. She mentioned needing to return some stuff at the mall and asked if I wanted to tag along. I figured, why not? At the mall, while she was handling her returns, I wandered into a store and found this amazing Patagonia jacket. She noticed me checking it out and asked if I wanted it. I laughed it off, saying it was $250 and a bit out of my budget. To my surprise, she grabbed the jacket and headed to the counter. I thought she was joking until she pulled out a manila folder full of $100 bills and paid for it. My jaw dropped. She just winked at me, and we left with my new jacket. Back at my house, before I got out of the car, she pulled out the folder again and casually stuffed $600 into my bag. I tried to give it back, but she insisted, showing me her purse, which had at least 6 or 7 more folders stuffed with cash. Eventually, I gave in. Over the next few months, she kept sending me money via Venmo, anywhere from $100 to $500 at a time, and buying me random things. If I mentioned being hungry, she'd send pizza. If I needed or wanted anything, it'd show up at my door a couple of days later. It was unreal. When I came home for my next break, we met up again, skipping dinner this time and getting straight to the fun. The next morning, as she was leaving, she put $1,000 on my coffee table. At this point, I knew better than to argue, so I thanked her. She waved goodbye and drove off. A few hours later, I tried texting her, but the messages wouldn't go through. I checked Snapchat, only to realize she had blocked me on everything, text, social media, you name it. I was confused but didn't push it, figuring it wasn't worth chasing her down. Weeks later, at around 2 a.m., I got a call from a blocked number. It was her. She sounded serious and almost scared, whispering, not in a flirty way but in a something's wrong way. She told me I couldn't tell anyone about her, our interactions, or even her name. She also asked me to delete any pictures she had sent me. I asked what was going on, but she just said she had to go and hung up. I never heard from her again. Still have the Patagonia though. Story 6. When I was 19, I met a 30-year-old widow on Xbox. She told me she played to pass the time since she was financially set for life after her husband passed away and wanted to make some Xbox friends. We started gaming together more and more, but eventually, my controller and headset broke and I couldn't keep up. She asked for my address, and a week later, a brand new controller and headset arrived at my door. I was blown away and couldn't thank her enough. When I asked what I could do to repay her, she simply said, just keep playing with me. Over the next few years, she'd occasionally buy me new games when they came out, even splurging on a few collector's editions when I mentioned them. She was incredibly generous. Eventually, life got busy for me with school and work, and we drifted apart. I couldn't find as much time to play anymore. I still think about her and sometimes try to find her online, but I can't remember her gamertag or Facebook. She'll always be one of the best gaming buddies I've ever had, and I really miss her. Story 7. About 6 years ago, I had just graduated college in Southern California and was living with my grandpa when I asked out a Chinese grad student I met at work. On our second date, she picked me up in a sleek black Audi and mentioned that her parents had leased it for her. We went to a Chinese restaurant. I had covered the bill on our first date, and since I was making $15 per hour at the time, I figured I would keep paying, being the typical red-blooded, Korean, American man. But when she started ordering lobster, duck, and enough food to feed a small army, I began to feel a little nervous. When the check came, I reached for it, but she quickly snatched it away. She pulled out her wallet, and without hesitation, pulled out 3 $100 bills like it was nothing. I caught a glimpse of the stack, all with Benjamin Franklin's face peeking out. She had at least $2,000 in cash on her. I don't like going to the bank, so I just get it all at once, she said. Meanwhile, I probably had less in my bank account than she had in her wallet. She ended up paying for the $200 plus meal and even let me take home the leftovers, so I was set for meals the entire week. From that point on, we alternated paying for dates. My meals were usually cheap, while hers were more extravagant. She would buy tickets for Disneyland, Lakers games, and treat me to fantastic meals. After about 5 months, she graduated, her student visa expired, and she went back to China. She was really down to earth. One time, we went to a spot near downtown, and she street parked in Skid Row. I advised against it, pointing out the homeless encampments, but she wasn't fazed. She said, relax. It's no big deal. Her English was good enough for us to have meaningful conversations, but once, when we were lying in bed and there was a lull in the conversation, she randomly said, I'm funnier in Chinese. I thought it was hilarious but also a little sad. Because of that, we mostly texted to plan weekends rather than chatting regularly. I sometimes wondered if she had other boyfriends she was juggling. She didn't have Facebook, just Weibo or some other Chinese social media. A couple of years later, I texted her again, but the bubbles were green instead of blue. Still, we had a lot of fun, and she really helped me get through those post-grad, broke days. I hope she's doing well. Story 8. I got a free personal training session at Equinox Gym, and during the session, I kept running into this woman who was doing the same routine as me. We joked about it a lot, and by the end of the session, we were chatting. She was a super attractive and fit 41-year-old, incredibly smart, and worked as a sex therapist with her own private practice. We really seemed to hit it off. I'm 26. After my session, the trainer and staff let me stick around and keep working out. The therapist lady came back over, probably because the trainer had left, and we kept talking. We exchanged numbers and decided to meet up sometime. Why not, right? Our first text conversation was only a few messages long before she told me straight up that I was cute and, despite being busy, she was looking for a casual hookup. I told her I was on the same page and luckily she lived pretty close by. For the last couple of months, I've been going over to her place about once a week to hang out and, well, hook up. She's also really into zodiac signs and tarot cards, and she loves analyzing me. She even wants to read my cards sometime. It's a bit weird, but honestly, it's kind of sexy when she talks about it, so whatever. At first, it wasn't a sugar mama situation, but we started going out to dinner for fun. Even though it wasn't really date-wise, she's paid for everything since. Then it turned into her buying me some nice things. Nothing too personal like clothes, but things like bottles of wine, scotch, and a candle she liked. Then this week, things went to the next level. She's going to Barbados in February, and after I jokingly said I'd love to go, she just booked me a ticket because, in her words, she felt like it. I'm an avid surfer, so she wants me to surf all morning while she sleeps in, and then we'll hang out on the island. I'm dropping $0. She's made it clear she doesn't want a relationship beyond something casual for a number of reasons, and after spending time with her, I believe her. She does like spending money on me, but it's not in the typical sugar mama way. It feels more like a fun, laid-back situation, and honestly, it works for me. Who knows, maybe she'll end up helping fund my business someday. Story 9. When I was 22, I met this woman online. We had been talking for a few weeks and decided to meet up. She was 30 at the time. The first time we met, she drove out to me, bringing food and a movie. I didn't really know much about her, but we hit it off right away. We kept seeing each other, and she would always come out to visit me, never asking me to drive to her. I didn't think much of it at first, but she would constantly surprise me with gifts, food, sports tickets, you name it. I couldn't really reciprocate, though, because I didn't have much money at the time. I had a simple job and was in the National Guard, so I felt bad that I couldn't get her things or travel to see her. I even told her that once. She just smiled and told me, "I don't care about that, I care about seeing you." After that, we ended up sleeping together, and let me tell you, it was the best I'd ever had. For a week after that, she didn't contact me, and I got worried it might have ruined things between us. I was bummed because we had such an amazing connection. But then she texted me, apologizing for the silence. She explained her job had taken her away from her usual communication channels. I honestly didn't care, I was just happy to hear from her again. Eventually, I asked her what she did for a living. It turned out she was the CEO of a multi-million-dollar business firm. My heart skipped a beat when I heard that. I didn't ask her why she was with me, but I couldn't help but wonder. For the next few years, we were essentially friends with benefits. Every time we saw each other, she'd bring me food and we'd do it. It was simple, but it worked for us. One day, she invited me camping. I met her entire family, and they were some of the nicest people I've ever met. They knew all about me and didn't judge at all. You could tell they were wealthy just by looking at them. The camping trip was amazing. Things only got better from there. Her family bought me a brand new vehicle, a house, and even helped me land a high-paying job. But the real shock came when she confessed her love for me. I was already in love with her too, and we made it official. We've been together for 9 months now, and we're expecting a baby. Story 10. My best friend currently has several sugar daddies. She's always enjoyed being single and meeting new people, so after ending her 4-year relationship, she was ready for a new adventure. Just before the breakup, she had heard some wild stories from a friend who had joined a sugar dating site. The man she met was repulsive, but he paid her a lot of money without expecting anything in return. That wasn't what my friend wanted. She just wanted to date without having to spend money, as she was completely broke. For example, when going to a club to meet people, she would have to pay entrance fees, and when asked out by a peer, going Dutch was normal. So, she joined the site as well. To her surprise, she was bombarded with messages from many attractive, charming men who treated her like it was a normal date. Her first date was with a guy who took her to a fancy restaurant, taught her about wine tasting, and took her back to his penthouse. Despite it not being her plan, they ended up doing it. They dated for a while, and she enjoyed meeting someone in a completely different stage of life. At one point he gave her $100, which felt awkward, so they stopped seeing each other after that. She started dating many more men, most of whom treated her to expensive dinners, and sometimes one thing led to another, though it was never an obligation. She met a few men who made her uncomfortable. For example, one man, 12 years older than her, admitted that she was the oldest woman he'd ever dated and that he had previously dated girls as young as 19. He was a teacher. Another guy had a great date with her, but when she declined to go to his place because she had her period, he got upset and accused her of tricking him. One particularly strange, but ongoing, relationship is with a man from abroad who often does business in our country. He dates her because she resembles his wife. She feels bad about it, but he's very clingy, wanting to spend every hour with her when he's in town. He's invited her to his home country when his wife is traveling, but she's declined. Then there's the incredibly rich guy. He's the oldest and least attractive of the men she dates, but he's also the nicest. They haven't had physical relation, and he's barely initiated it. He's given her a $100 passport, an iPhone with a grocery app attached to his account, a designer electric boiler, a Dyson vacuum, and a new bed, since she had just moved and couldn't afford the essentials. He also treats her to the most expensive dinners and drinks in the city, and he wants to take her to LA, offering to pay for separate rooms at $2,250 each. She lives on a university campus different from the one she attends, and she's been dating a lot of professors through these arrangements. However, she's starting to get bored with it because they all seem to be the same type. Wealthy businessmen who are too independent for a real relationship but enjoy the admiration of a sassy, cheeky girl. So, lately, she's been dating more college students in regular friends with benefits arrangements, even though it means she gets less free food. Story 11. I met a girl on a dating app that wasn't one of the popular ones. I'm from the Midwest, and she's from the West Coast. At first, I thought she might be fake because of all the spam bots on the app, but I kept talking to her until we decided to FaceTime one day. It turns out she was real. Things took a surprising turn when I got sick after chatting with her for a week. Once she found out, she had care packages delivered to me the next day. Yes, I gave her my address for some reason. The package included balloons, medicine, a stuffed animal, and more. The next day, there was lunch, dinner, and this continued for the entire week. I didn't think much of it at the time, since I was sick and enjoyed the fact that I didn't have to go outside at all. This was during winter too. I eventually recovered and jokingly said that she might as well come visit me and take care of me after 2 weeks of talking. To my surprise, she said sure and told me she'd book a ticket. I thought she was joking, but next thing I knew, I got a screenshot of her plane ticket and I was meeting her in person after just 2 weeks of talking. She stayed with me for a week. Yes, things did happen between us, if you were wondering, and during that time, she paid for everything. I'm talking everything, my rent, food, even a shopping spree at the mall. I couldn't help but think, man, this is what it feels like to be a hot chick, huh? Anyway, 1 week turned into 2, and the shopping spree continued. I'll apologize now, but the rest of the story isn't that interesting. She was really into me and wanted a relationship, while I wasn't looking for one, especially not a long-distance one. She eventually left, saying she'd be back, and she was. For the next 2 months, she'd spend 2 to 3 weeks at my place and continue to pay for everything, until I realized I was taking advantage of her, though she knew and didn't care. I ended things with her after that. My friends and family had noticed I'd been MIA for about 3 months and asked what happened. When I told them the story, no one believed me until they saw all the stuff she'd bought me. I was told I was stupid for letting her go, but honestly, it was a great experience. We still keep in touch from time to time, and the last I heard, she found someone, got married, and I'm genuinely happy for her. All in all, I think it ended on a happy note. Story 12. A few months ago, I started doing cam shows out of curiosity to see if anyone would tune in. To my surprise, people did, and I gained a decent following. I'm not huge, but by the time I'd finished streaming, I'd average around 300 viewers. Eventually, I decided to verify my account. Figured I might as well get paid for it. I'm straight, but I didn't mind if guys watched or tipped. I was upfront about doing my own thing, no gimmicks or requests. One viewer, though, stood out. He never spoke in chat and respected the fact that I was straight. Instead, he started tipping generously and often. Then, through my mod, he suggested I make an Amazon wishlist. I added some over-the-top items just for fun, not expecting much. But he started buying things: an HD camera, a new monitor, a stereo system, another 4K monitor, a PC, even $100 gift cards here and there. On top of that, he's tipped me over $3,000, all without asking for anything in return. I even offered him a private show as a thank you, but he declined, saying he was happy just watching along with everyone else. At this point, he feels less like a fan and more like a corporate sponsor, or maybe even a sugar daddy, in the best way possible. His generosity couldn't have come at a better time. I was struggling financially, and thanks to him, I've managed to catch up on overdue bills and get back on track. Honestly, he's been the best thing to happen to me this year. Story 13. When I was 23, I had a one-night stand with a 45-year-old man I worked with. He was a perpetual bachelor, the straight kind, and a lot of fun to be around. At the time, I was coming out of a rough patch in my life and wasn't ready for a serious relationship. So, when he suggested turning our one-night stand into a regular thing, I agreed. It was perfect. Neither of us wanted anything serious. We both loved steak and scotch. We lived in the same city. Plus, I was a broke student and he was a well-off professional, which meant I got to experience a lifestyle far beyond my means a few nights a month. What wasn't to love? We each dated for about 6 months. He'd take me out to dinner and drinks, usually a fancy steakhouse, where we'd sit at the bar, chat with his friends, and, I assume, let him subtly show off his 23-year-old arm candy. Afterward, we'd either grab another drink or head back to his penthouse. I always offered to split the bill, but he never let me. Here's the thing, he wasn't just a fling, he was also an amazing friend. We'd laugh, talk about everything, and genuinely enjoy each other's company. One of my favorite memories is the night he grabbed his electric guitar, stood on his kitchen table, and played my favorite Rolling Stones songs while I sat on the floor, watching and laughing. Even after we stopped hooking up, we stayed close. We'd have dinner together weekly, and once I finished school, he even let me pay for a meal now and then. Over time, he became one of my best friends. He passed away 6 years ago, and I still miss him terribly. It's funny to think of him as a sugar daddy, though that's probably what he was. I think he'd get a kick out of the title, honestly. Story 14. I randomly met a girl on OkCupid who happened to be around my age, and absolutely loaded thanks to a trust fund. It wasn't exactly a sugar mommy arrangement, but I definitely benefited from her wealth. She could afford to splurge and didn't think twice about it. There were fancy dinners, the occasional trip abroad, and even times when she decided she wanted some ridiculously expensive gadget. She'd pull out a wad of cash from her purse, like it was Monopoly money, and pay for it without a second thought. Unfortunately, the perks came with a downside. She was a paranoid cokehead. Over time, her issues started to outweigh the good stuff, and it just wasn't worth it anymore. Story 15. I was at a bar in London when I met a man who offered to buy me some drinks. We got to talking, and eventually, I agreed to go back to his place. He was in London on business and staying at a fancy hotel in Mayfair. We stayed up all night watching a movie, having sexy time, drinking wine, and ordering room service. At one point, he got tired and asked if I wanted £100 and his hotel key to go out and have some fun before coming back to sleep, but I was exhausted too, so I passed. In the morning, we had breakfast together and exchanged contact details. After he flew back to Toronto, we kept in touch. He'd send me gifts in the mail, which I found thoughtful. He had other sugar babies around the world, but that didn't bother me. From our conversations, I gathered that he'd had his heart broken in the past and struggled with commitment. Instead, he found happiness in these kinds of arrangements, and I was okay with that. Story 16. When I was 26 and working as a bartender, I met an older woman, 48, who sat at my bar one afternoon. She was friendly and I was friendly back. I've always been attracted to older women, and she was stunning. She looked a lot like Laura Dern. At one point, she asked if there was a spot nearby where decent single men hung out. Maybe she was baiting me, but it didn't feel that way. I casually replied, "Well, I'm single and decent." She looked surprised, probably not expecting someone 20 years younger to throw it back at her like that. Honestly, I wasn't even trying to flirt, I was just stating a fact. But then we both realized what had just happened. We locked eyes for a moment, and I saw her expression shift, just as mine did, from shock to a mutual, "Screw it, why not?" She turned out to be amazing. She worked at a major bank and made about $500,000 a year. She paid for everything. New phone, new car, a watch, a dog, new clothes, even a gym membership with a personal trainer. While we genuinely liked each other, I knew part of her enjoyment came from having me as arm candy, showing up with a fit, younger guy at dates and work events. She was adamant about me hitting the gym daily since she was footing the bill. Physically, she was insatiable. Having always dated men her own age, she seemed thrilled to try something completely different. She knew it wasn't going to last forever, so she wanted to make the most of it. She couldn't keep her hands off me, and we explored just about every fantasy she had, doing in her office, behind the bar after closing, on a pool table, role-playing, leather, swapping, public escapades, and even three-ways with both women and men. Every night felt like a new adventure. After about a year, the excitement started to fade. I was ready for something more conventional, and she seemed ready for someone closer to her age with a similar lifestyle. We both settled back into reality, but it was an unforgettable experience while it lasted. Story 17. Believe it or not, my sugar relationship started because of Reddit. I had a few photos of myself on my main account, and someone liked what they saw enough to send me a PM asking if I'd be interested in working something out. He'd noticed a comment in my post history mentioning that I'd been a cam girl before, so his message wasn't entirely out of the blue. The deal was sealed when, for our first meeting, he handed me $1,000 just to have dinner with him. After that, he offered $500 a week to sleep with him whenever he was available. Interestingly, he wasn't free that often, maybe once a month or so, and the longest stretch we went without seeing each other was 5 months because he was out of state. Even then, he kept paying me weekly. Over time, as he got to know me better, his gifts shifted. Initially, it was things like lingerie and fancy dinners. But eventually, it became cocaine. I wasn't in a great place in my life. My days were a bit of a blur, and most of the money I got from him went straight into fueling my bender. Looking back, that entire period feels dark and hazy. That said, I know he cared about me. One day, after some obvious self-reflection on his part, he took me out to dinner and told me he was checking me into rehab. I never saw him again after that. To be honest, I'm not sure if I ever even knew his real name, which made trying to find him later impossible. If he's still out there and somehow happens to read this on Reddit, I want him to know, from where I stand now, I don't regret what happened. And I'm grateful for his help. Story 18. Honestly, it just takes being a kind, understanding person who sees others for who they truly are. As an attractive gay man, I've had men pay for things I never asked for, and it's happened more often than not. The key for me was building some kind of genuine connection with these men. I'd listen to them, be honest with them, hang out, and sometimes talk about physical intimacy, but always in a way that felt healthy and comfortable for both of us. It's a side of my life I haven't shared much, but I wanted to offer some insight into my experience. I'm grateful for the kindness these men showed, just for the chance to spend time with me or talk to me. Sometimes I'd sleep with them, but it was often to help them feel better, or because I genuinely found them attractive. I've even sold my used shoes to men who were into feet stuffs and indulged other requests from time to time. There's no shame in being human and offering someone a little attention, especially when both people walk away with something beneficial. I still keep in touch with most of these men today. There are only a few I've distanced myself from over the years. Looking back, the help I received came at times when I was struggling financially, and it played a big part in helping me get to a much happier and more stable place in life. I hope this offers a little perspective on my experience. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.